You know how people say family is everything? Yeah, that's cute until your family becomes the reason you question your own worth. I threw my dad a birthday party. Not just any party, a classy, candlelit dinner at one of the nicest spots in the city. I planned it for weeks, dropped a small fortune, even picked the playlist. It was supposed to be a surprise. But the only surprise that night, my dad slurring through a toast about how I was the biggest mistake of his life. Let me rewind. My name's Lila. I'm 23 now, but some wounds stick to you like glue no matter how old you get. My parents divorced when I was 6. They shouldn't have gotten married in the first place, honestly. They were high school sweethearts married way too young and thought love would magically pay the bills. Spoiler alert, it didn't. By the time I was born, they were knee-deep in debt, buried under student loans, and barely speaking to each other unless it was to fight. And oh, they fought. Loud, daily. Pancake mornings turned into screaming matches over whether my mom was a lazy mess or if my dad was just like his father, selfish and spineless. I'd sit at the table pushing cereal around pretending I couldn't hear, but I always heard. I heard everything. And somehow I always knew the truth. They only stayed together because of me. I wasn't their miracle baby. I was the glue that didn't stick. My dad worked long hours, then started staying out longer just to avoid home. My mom drank more. They stopped pretending to like each other. Or me. Most nights, I was the one who made sure the lights were off or that I had anything to eat. Ever tried heating up a cold can of soup while your mom's passed out and your dad's MIA? I have. Too many times. I started playing peacekeeper, mediator, therapist, and I was 8, 9, I knew exactly what triggered their fights, so I did everything I could to avoid them. Picked up my dad's socks off the floor. Turned down the TV before he got home. Was it healthy? No. But I thought if I kept the volcano from erupting, maybe they'd love me a little more. They didn't. I remember one night so vividly, it might as well be burned into my skull. My mom hurled a bottle at my dad's face. He ducked too late. Blood everywhere. I called 911 with shaking hands, my voice high-pitched and trembling. The cops showed up. So did Child Protective Services. But since there were no bruises on me, they just gave a verbal warning. Next day, they acted like it was a normal Tuesday. Promised me they'd change. They didn't. When I was 13, they finally divorced for good. I should have felt sad, but I remember breathing easier. It wasn't peace, but at least the screaming stopped. Mom and I stayed in the house. She got a secretarial job thanks to her cousin pulling strings and slowly rebuilt her life. She never stopped trying, never stopped loving me. My dad, on the other hand, he spiraled hard. Drinking, dating, disappearing. When it was his turn to have me on weekends, I'd show up to beer cans and unfamiliar faces. Some woman's kid playing Xbox while I sat awkwardly on the edge of the couch. The weirdest part. My dad loved being a pretend father. To kids who weren't even his. He'd post pictures with his girlfriend's children, calling them my champs, and family is forever. Meanwhile, he'd forget my birthday unless my mom reminded him. One time, I asked him why he didn't come to my school dance. He told me he was fixing a sink at his girlfriend's place. Cool. I eventually stopped expecting anything from him. That sounds bitter, but it's just survival. I started building my own life, making my own plans. Picked a college in a different city, as far from his drama as I could get. He didn't fight it. Maybe part of him was relieved. It was months into freshman year when he finally called. Said he wanted to meet up, that he missed me. I believed him. I really, really wanted to believe him. I wore my best outfit, even got to the cafe early. He never showed. 3 hours later, he texted saying he lost track of time watching a football game with his stepson Mason. That was his girlfriend's son, 5 years older than me, and my dad's new golden boy. Apparently watching his game was more important than seeing his daughter for the first time in months. I cried that night. Then I blocked him. Mom was furious. For the first time ever, she told him off. Said if he couldn't treat me like his daughter, he didn't deserve to be in my life. He sent emails after that, long ones, saying he was sorry, that he wanted to do better. I never replied. Fast forward to my junior year, my world collapsed. Mom got in a car accident. She didn't make it. Everything went dark after that. My dad showed up at the hospital, and for one horrifying moment, I clung to him. I didn't care about history, I just needed someone. He arranged the funeral. Made it beautiful, I'll give him that. Gina, his wife now, and Mason came too. Everyone said the right things. Brought casseroles, offered hugs, but nothing filled the hole in my chest. In her will, Mom left me the house, the car, her savings. Enough to finish school, enough to be okay. It was the first time I ever felt safe, like someone had my back even in death. Dad called more after that, tried to be there. Took me to lunch, remembered my graduation, brought Gina sometimes. She'd be sweet one moment and passive-aggressive the next. Mason mostly ignored me. Whatever, I didn't need them. I had Harry, my boyfriend, my best friend, and I had me. I was healing, and then the birthday party happened. I wish I could say the party was the first time things felt off, but deep down, I always knew there was a shift happening. Slowly, quietly, like a door closing behind me 1 inch at a time. After Mom passed, my father tried harder. That's the truth. He called more, sent random texts, took me out to eat every now and then. He'd always invite Gina and Mason, acting like they were some kind of bridge between us. But the truth, they weren't building a bridge. They were just standing on the other side, waving at me while I stayed stranded. I tried to be polite, nodding along at dinners, smiling through awkward silences. But the dynamic never felt right. Gina treated me like a guest at best, an intruder at worst. Mason barely looked in my direction unless his mom nudged him to. At first, I blamed myself. Thought maybe I was cold or distant or too sad to be friendly. I told myself, give it time. Let the grief breathe. Let things settle. But time didn't fix anything. If anything, it made the cracks deeper. There was one evening a few months after my mom's funeral that really stuck with me. My dad had invited me to spend the weekend with them. I said yes because I was trying to rebuild whatever connection we had left. We went to a football game, his idea, of course, and halfway through, Gina got annoyed that we didn't want to stop for pizza on the way home. She actually sulked in the car while we got burgers, then made a scene in the driveway about how nobody ever listens to her. My dad, as usual, caved. Ordered the pizza anyway. We all ended up eating in silence while she talked about her high school popularity like it was a badge of honor. I remember thinking, this is the woman he built his new life around. It wasn't just the pizza. It was everything. Gina spent most of her time talking about herself, making sideways comments about other women, bragging about things no one had asked her about. When Mason brought home a girlfriend, Gina went full interrogation mode, asking her how many guys she had been with, if she was on birth control, even implying she might be trying to trap Mason. The poor girl looked mortified. Mason didn't defend her. And when he confronted Gina later, she cried and turned the whole thing into a guilt trip about being a protective mom. I sat there thinking, wow, this is what my dad signed up for. At some point, I just stopped trying to connect. Every time I asked my dad to hang out one-on-one, Gina would find some way to interrupt, either tagging along or calling him every hour to check in. I later found out she was using his phone's tracking app. She literally followed him around like a security drone. When I brought it up gently, my dad just shrugged and said, "She's just protective." I bit my tongue, but I wanted to scream, "Protective of what you or her control." Then came the day I truly broke. It was the 1-year anniversary of my mother's death. I didn't want anything fancy, just a quiet day with my dad. I told him clearly I wanted to visit her grave, bring flowers, maybe lunch after just him and me. No distractions, no noise. He said yes, promised even. But of course he showed up with Gina. She was dressed like she was headed to brunch, flipping through music on her phone, munching on chips in the passenger seat. I should have said something right then, but I didn't. I kept hoping she'd respect the moment. Spoiler, she didn't. When I started crying in the car, looking at old photos of Mom, Gina turned around and asked why I was still crying after a whole year. I felt like someone had punched the air out of my lungs. My dad didn't say a word, Not a single word, just kept driving. At the cemetery, she refused to get out of the car because it was too hot. I stood there holding a bouquet, staring at the grave alone, while she sat inside with the AC blasting. 5 minutes later, she started calling my dad's phone repeatedly, telling us to hurry up because she was getting dizzy. I felt like I was in a bad dream, like the whole day was being stolen from me in real time. I didn't even get to say what I wanted to say to my mom. We left early. Lunch was even worse. She picked a Chinese buffet because it was her favorite, even though neither of us wanted it. I sat there barely touching my food. She noticed and asked if I was okay, but before I could answer, she launched into a lecture about how I was bringing the mood down and how if she ever died, she wouldn't want Mason to act this gloomy. That was the final straw. I snapped. Told her flat out that she had no right to tell me how to mourn my own mother. That if she thought I was ruining her fun, maybe she should have stayed home. That I didn't ask her to come, and I certainly didn't need her judgment on a day that already tore me apart. The table went silent. Gina looked stunned. My dad just stared like he couldn't believe I'd dared to speak. I left the restaurant, walked out into the parking lot needing air more than I needed food. My dad came out later looking tired. He said he understood how I felt, but I should try to be more considerate of Gina, that she gave up her whole day to be there for me. I laughed, bitter and low. Gave up her day I had given up my whole childhood. I told him I never asked her to come. I just wanted to be with him. But apparently even that was too much to ask. Then he hit me with something that truly broke my heart, he said. Gina thought I was too dependent on him, and as an adult, maybe I needed to start creating some space. That word, dependent, hit like a slap. It was the same thing he used to say when I was a kid. When I wanted to play with him for just one more hour. When I asked for help with homework. When I cried after nightmares. He'd say I was too needy. And now here I was, an adult, still being told the same thing. Maybe I was needy. Or maybe I just wanted a father. I did apologize during the drive back, mostly out of guilt. But it didn't matter. A week later, my dad asked if I could come to dinner and apologize again. In front of Gina. Because she was still really upset and felt publicly humiliated. I said no. I wasn't going to grovel for feeling grief. I told him if she wanted peace, she could start by acknowledging that not everything is about her. He didn't respond. Since then, the air between us has stayed cold. Mason stopped speaking to me completely. Gina pretends I don't exist unless we're forced to be in the same room, like at birthdays or holidays. And even then, she wears this fake smile that makes my skin crawl. But I got through it. I finished college. Sold mom's old place, bought a little condo closer to work. My boyfriend, Harry, he's been my rock through all of this. Patient kind with none of the emotional landmines my family buried me under. My dad met him a few times and liked him surprisingly. They even bonded over football, which felt like a small miracle. I thought maybe, just maybe, we were healing, that maybe things could be different. So when my dad's 50th birthday rolled around, I decided to take a chance. Maybe this was our moment to reset everything. Maybe all those years of pain could lead to something better. I planned the party myself, reserved a private room at a beautiful restaurant, picked out the wine, ordered a custom cake, arranged every single detail down to the napkin colors. It was my gift to him. My way of saying I still care. I still want a connection. Even after everything. He said he was excited. Said he'd bring Gina and Mason, and maybe this would be the turning point for all of us. I wasn't so sure, but I didn't want to ruin the mood. I told him if they're respectful, I'm okay with it. I should have known better. The night of the party felt electric at first. You know that kind of quiet excitement where you're nervous and hopeful at the same time. That's exactly how I felt. Harry and I got to the restaurant early. I checked the table settings 3 times. Everything was perfect. Subtle candles, navy tablecloths, gold name cards, even a small gift bag with a handwritten note at my dad's seat. I wanted him to feel seen, celebrated, loved. I told myself this night could be different. that maybe time really could change people. We waited. 20 minutes passed, then 40. I called my dad twice. No answer. I started to feel that familiar tightness in my chest, the kind that comes right before disappointment. Still, I smiled at Harry and said, "He'll be here soon." An hour later, they finally walked in. My dad was laughing, not in a light, happy way, but loud and sloppy, the kind of laugh that made heads turn. He stumbled a bit, and Mason had to steady him. I stood up quickly. My dad pulled me into a hug too tight, too long. That's when I caught the smell. Whiskey, strong. I stepped back confused, trying not to let my expression show what I was thinking. Gina breezed past me like I was part of the wallpaper. She went straight to Harry, hugged him with this exaggerated sweetness that made my stomach twist. Mason nodded at me, expression flat, like he didn't want to be there either. But here we all were. I asked what happened. Mason said my dad had started pre-gaming hours before dinner because he was excited and wanted to start the fun early. Gina laughed and said I should loosen up because it was a celebration, not a funeral. My jaw clenched. Harry put a hand on my back, grounding me. I thanked the waiter, motioned everyone to sit, and tried to salvage the night. I told myself maybe it wouldn't spiral. Maybe he'd sober up enough to eat and leave quietly. I was wrong. The waiter brought the main courses. My dad couldn't even hold his fork straight. His knife clattered to the floor twice. He kept interrupting conversations with offbeat jokes that only he found funny. Gina and Mason giggled at everything he said like it was some comedy show. I kept glancing at the other tables. Diners were starting to notice. Some looked amused, others annoyed. I started to feel a sinking weight in my chest. This was supposed to be his night. My night, too, in a way. A quiet reunion. A sign that maybe we could still mean something to each other. When the wine was served, I tried to stop him from drinking more. Gently placed my hand on his glass and said, "Maybe you've had enough, Dad." He waved me off, muttered something about how he wasn't a child and kept drinking. That's when I knew. This wasn't going to get better. He stood up suddenly, almost knocking over his chair, tapped his glass with a spoon. "I want to make a toast," he said, swaying slightly. Everyone froze. I held my breath. He looked around the room, smiling like he was about to give a wedding speech. 50 years old today. Can you believe it?" He chuckled. "I've had a wild ride, but I'm thankful. Thankful for this beautiful woman." He gestured to Gina, who blew him a kiss. "And for this incredible young man," he said, nodding at Mason, "who's more of a son to me than I ever thought I'd have." My fingers tightened around my glass. I stared at the table, praying it would end there. But he kept going. "You know what best decision I ever made." He paused, raising his glass. "Divorcing that lunatic I first married. Man, she made my life hell." Gina cackled like it was the best punchline she'd ever heard. Mason grinned. My chest burned. My mom wasn't even there to defend herself, and he was trashing her like she was some joke from his past. But he wasn't done. She was crazy, controlling, and when she got pregnant... He chuckled again, this time darker. I knew I was stuck. Thought I'd be miserable forever. He turned to me, slurred. "But hey, no offense, right, kiddo? You turned out fine. Little moody, but not a bad egg." Gina laughed harder now. "Anyway," he said, raising his glass even higher, "here's to new beginnings, to real family. Gina Mason, this next chapter is for us. No more dragging the past around." I didn't say a word. My hands were shaking. I stared at my plate, blinking fast to keep tears from falling. Harry reached for my hand under the table. I gripped it like a lifeline. My father just said out loud that I was a mistake, that my entire existence was a regret he didn't want to carry anymore. Gina leaned in, whispering something to Mason, both of them snickering. That was the final snap in my mind. The moment I stopped feeling embarrassed and started feeling something sharper, cold, clear. I stood up, heart pounding. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't cry. I just calmly walked to the waiter and asked him to call security. It didn't take long. 2 men in black suits showed up within minutes. They approached the table politely but firmly. "Sir, we're going to have to ask you to leave," one said. My dad blinked, confused. What, he slurred? I didn't do anything. I walked over, voice low but steady. "You humiliated me, disrespected my mother. You don't get to stay and pretend that's okay." Gina exploded. "Are you serious? He's the guest of honor." Her voice rose. "You're making a scene. He's just having fun." I didn't even look at her. I turned to my dad, meeting his eyes. "You said I was your biggest mistake. Well, tonight was mine, thinking you deserved this party." He looked stunned, as if it hadn't even registered what he said. Mason stood, too, muttering something under his breath as he helped my dad out of his chair. Gina kept yelling, calling me bitter, ungrateful, dramatic. The security guards calmly escorted them out as diners watched in stunned silence. The restaurant was dead quiet for a moment, and then the noise resumed like nothing had happened. I apologized to the staff, left a huge tip, thanked the waiter who gave me a small nod of sympathy. Then I sat down with Harry, numb and hollow. He didn't say anything, just stayed beside me, letting me breathe. My phone buzzed nonstop for the rest of the night. Messages from Gina calling me selfish, from Mason telling me I ruined everything. My dad called twice. I didn't answer. Later that night, I stared at the ceiling in my apartment. Not crying, not angry, just exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that comes when you finally stop chasing someone who never once turned around to look for you. And for the first time in my life, I stopped wondering if it was me, if I was too sensitive, too needy, too hard to love. It wasn't me, it was him. For a few days, I didn't speak to anyone. No calls, no texts. I just went to work, came home, and let the silence settle around me like fog. The kind that doesn't let you see more than a few feet ahead, but feels strangely safe. I didn't cry much. Not after that night. I think I'd already done all my crying years ago. What I felt now wasn't sadness. It was something harder to name. Emptiness, maybe? Not the kind that screams, but the kind that hums quietly in your chest and refuses to go away. Gina kept sending voice notes. Long ones, dramatic, like a soap opera monologue with all the tears and none of the self-awareness. She said I humiliated my father, ruined a milestone night, and disrespected the family. She used that word a lot. Family. As if repeating it could make it real. Mason chimed in, too, calling me a brat, saying I was jealous of their bond. That I should have just left quietly if I was uncomfortable. I didn't respond to any of it. My dad, though, he didn't text. Not at first. But 4 days later, I woke up to an email from him. Long, rambling, full of backhanded apologies. He said he didn't mean what he said, that the alcohol made him talk nonsense, that I was always loved, just misunderstood, that Gina was trying to bring everyone together and I'd made it harder. I read it twice, not because I didn't understand the words, but because I was looking for the part where he really meant it. I couldn't find it. I didn't reply. More time passed. A week, then 2. The silence grew heavy again. But this time it didn't scare me. It felt like a kind of healing, like the absence of noise was finally teaching me how to listen to myself. For once, I didn't feel guilty for stepping back. I didn't feel like I owed anyone my peace just because they shared DNA with me. Around that time, Harry suggested I try therapy. I was hesitant. I'd always thought I was doing fine. Functioning right, good job, stable life, not crying in grocery stores. But something in me was still tangled up, so I went. Just once at first. Sat across from a quiet woman with soft eyes and waited for her to ask questions. She didn't. She just said, "Tell me what brought you here." And I did. Everything. Not just the birthday, but the years before it. The quiet moments, the loud ones, the late nights alone. The phone calls that never came. The child who kept cleaning up messes that were never hers. I talked until my throat hurt. And she just listened. It was strange, freeing. Like finally putting down a heavy box you'd been carrying so long you forgot what it felt like to be light. I kept going back. Each session peeled away a little more of the numbness. I started seeing things clearly, like how my father had always wanted the role of a parent without the responsibility. How Gina fed his ego because it made him feel important again. How Mason, despite being 5 years older than me, was still playing the role of the golden son in someone else's story. And how I, quiet, loyal, aching me, had spent years trying to earn love that should have been given without question. It wasn't about the party, or the toast, or even the cruel words. It was about decades of being invisible. And that night in that restaurant, I had finally drawn the line. The next time my dad tried calling, I let it ring. Then I blocked the number. I didn't write a dramatic farewell. No final message, no speech, just silence. My goodbye wasn't loud. It was firm, and it was enough. A month later, I found out through a mutual acquaintance that my Reddit post had gone viral. I'd written it anonymously, mostly to check if I was being too harsh. Just a late-night rant, really. But people resonated. Thousands of comments poured in. Some heartbreaking, some hilarious. But most of them said the same thing: you did the right thing. Mason must have seen it. He sent the link to my dad. I never got the full story, but someone told me my father finally read the comments, and that he wasn't taking it well. Apparently, seeing strangers say out loud what I'd been quietly swallowing for years hit differently. Maybe it stung. Maybe it made him think. But I wasn't waiting for a response anymore. A few weeks after that, Harry and I took a weekend trip. Somewhere quiet. No phones, no notifications. Just a cabin in the woods, a few books, and the kind of silence that felt warm instead of hollow. One night, while we sat outside under a thick sky of stars, Harry asked me something. "Do you miss him?" I thought about it, really thought. Then I said, "I don't miss him. I miss the idea of him, the version I wanted him to be." He nodded. "That makes sense." I leaned against his shoulder and closed my eyes. And in that moment, for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. The truth is, people talk a lot about forgiveness, about how you have to let go to move on. But no one tells you that sometimes peace doesn't come from forgiving. It comes from letting go of the hope that they'll ever change, from choosing yourself instead of choosing pain again and again. That's what I did. I chose me. It's strange how peace can feel like unfamiliar territory. After so many years of chaos, I didn't know what to do with the calm. There were no more guilt-laced phone calls, no passive-aggressive texts from Gina, no sudden requests to talk things out. Just nothing. A clean pause. It should have felt lonely, but it didn't. Instead, it felt like silence was teaching me how to breathe again. Therapy helped more than I ever expected. I began to recognize the patterns I had been stuck in since childhood, how I always tried to fix broken things even when they cut me, how I made excuses for people who never once apologized unless they were cornered, how I kept confusing love with obligation. I stopped blaming myself, stopped trying to explain my pain in a way that made it palatable to people who never wanted to understand it to begin with. And somewhere along the way, I started to change. I moved forward with intention, spent more time with people who made me feel like I mattered, old friends I hadn't seen in years, coworkers who invited me to spontaneous lunches, my mom's cousins who always treated me like one of their own. I even started volunteering on weekends at a youth center, not because I was trying to distract myself, but because I wanted to give what I never got: kindness without conditions. Harry stayed by my side through it all. He didn't try to fix me. He didn't push me to hurry through my grief. He just stayed. Some nights we didn't talk at all. We'd just cook together, eat in silence, and let the quiet do the work. There was something healing about that, about being allowed to exist without performing. He wasn't trying to replace anything. He was simply showing me what it looked like when someone shows up and stays. My dad reached out one last time. It was a letter, a real one sent in the mail. I found it in my mailbox on a Wednesday evening after work. The envelope was plain, no return address, just my name written in familiar handwriting. I stood in my hallway for a long time before opening it. Inside was a letter that started with, "I don't expect you to read this," which ironically made me read every word. He apologized again, said he'd reread my post a dozen times and realized how blind he'd been. How often he'd tried to rewrite the past to avoid facing the damage he caused. He didn't blame Gina. He didn't make excuses. He just said he was sorry, that he failed me, that I deserved better, that he didn't know how to be a good father, but if there was still a chance, any chance, he wanted to try. I stared at that letter for a long time. Then I folded it back up and put it in a drawer, because I had finally reached a place where I didn't need him to fix anything. His regret didn't erase the years he spent pretending I didn't need him. And as much as I appreciated the apology, it didn't make him someone safe. Not for me. Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. Some are better as ashes. I was done setting myself on fire just to keep something standing. Around that time, I got promoted at work. Nothing huge, but enough to make me feel like I was finally moving towards something that belonged to me. I celebrated with Harry and a few friends. It was quiet, warm, full of laughter that didn't come with a price. No one drank too much. No one gave speeches that left wounds. Just music stories and a small cake with my name spelled correctly. That night, as I washed the dishes with music playing softly in the background, Harry came up behind me, wrapped his arms around my waist, and whispered, "You're doing it. You're living." I smiled without thinking, because for the first time in a long time, I actually believed it. I sold my mom's house a few months later. It wasn't easy. Every corner held memories. Her perfume still lingered in the bedroom. The coffee mug she always used was still sitting in the cabinet. But I knew it was time. I needed to let go, not of her, but of the grief that kept me trapped in the past. I kept a few things. The mug, her old sweater, a photo of us from when I was 8, both laughing with whipped cream on our noses. That picture now sits on my bookshelf next to a candle I light every Sunday. My way of saying I'm still here and so are you. Mason and Gina eventually faded into the background. I heard through someone that Mason had moved out trying to make his own path. I don't know if Gina still brings up my name. I don't really care. She never knew me. Only the version of me she created to justify her own cruelty. I no longer carry the need to prove anything to her, or to anyone. It's funny when you stop chasing people who never see you, you start seeing yourself more clearly. And that version of me, the one I see now, she's not broken, she's not bitter, she's not too needy or too sensitive. She's just human. And after years of feeling like I was too much or not enough, I finally realized I don't have to shrink myself to make others comfortable. I still think about my dad. Not often, but sometimes. Like when I pass by a father walking his daughter to school, or when I see an old man buying birthday balloons at the store. It's not anger I feel anymore. Just quiet. Like a story that ended years ago and I've finally stopped trying to rewrite the ending. And honestly, that's enough. A year passed, maybe more. I stopped counting after a while. Life began unfolding in small, quiet ways. Morning routines, late night talks with Harry, new friends, slow weekends. Things I never thought I'd appreciate started to feel sacred, like sipping coffee without rushing, or dancing barefoot in the kitchen with music low and the windows open. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, but it was real, and it was mine. My father didn't try to reach out again after that letter, not even for the holidays. I used to think that would break me, that if he gave up on me entirely, it'd prove I wasn't worth the effort, but it didn't. Instead, it confirmed what I already knew deep down: he only fought for things that served him. I just never did. Not really. I was the obligation, not the priority. And that's something I had to stop mourning. I ran into Mason once, totally by accident. It was at a bookstore of all places. He was picking up a self-help book, looked up, and we locked eyes. For a split second, I thought he might say something, but he didn't. Just gave a small nod, almost like an apology that never made it into words, and walked away. I stood there for a moment, the silence pressing on my chest like old dust, and then I turned and walked in the opposite direction. I didn't need closure anymore. That's what therapy taught me. Closure isn't something people give you. It's something you choose when you stop needing an ending that makes sense. I started writing again. Not for anyone, just for me. Little stories, memories, bits of the past I wanted to let go of by giving them a home on the page. It helped, a lot. Especially when the grief showed up in ways I didn't expect, like hearing a song my mom used to hum while doing the dishes or seeing someone wear the same shade of lipstick she wore. That kind of grief doesn't ask permission. It just walks in. But I stopped pushing it away. I let it stay when it came. Sat with it, let it pass. Because now I understood it was just love with nowhere else to go. Harry asked me to move in with him. It wasn't a big speech. Just one evening over dinner, he said, "You already live here more than you don't. Let's make it official." And I smiled because I knew I was ready. Not just for the toothbrush next to his, but for a life built on calm respect and love that didn't need fixing. So I packed my things, left the condo, and started a new chapter without looking back. Somewhere along the line, I realized I'd become someone my younger self would be proud of. Not perfect, not always put together, but strong in ways that don't show on the surface. Like the strength it takes to walk away without bitterness, or to forgive someone without ever letting them back in, or to rebuild yourself with your own hands after being knocked down by people who were supposed to protect you. I visited my mom's grave last month, alone this time. No rushed visits, no voices talking over me, just me, the flowers she loved, and a clear blue sky. I sat there and told her everything. About Harry, about my job, about how I'm still learning to laugh without feeling guilty. I told her I missed her, every day. And then I thanked her for everything, for being the only parent who ever tried, for staying when she had every reason to walk away, for leaving behind enough love to carry me through the years she couldn't be here. I left the flowers by her headstone and promised I'd be back, that I was okay now, really okay. Sometimes I think about the party, about how everything unraveled that night, how the people who were supposed to show up for me ended up revealing who they really were. I don't regret it anymore. If anything, I'm grateful. Because that night broke the last thread I was clinging to. And sometimes freedom doesn't come from forgiveness. It comes from surrender. From the quiet decision to stop showing up for people who never show up for you. Reddit was the first place I ever told this story. I didn't think it would matter. I just needed to get it out. But the support, the kindness, the strangers who said, "I see you," that meant something, more than I can say. Because growing up invisible makes you believe that no one will ever care about your voice, that your pain is just noise. But it wasn't. It never was. And if there's one thing I'd want anyone reading this to take away, it's this: you're allowed to walk away. You're allowed to stop trying. You don't have to carry the weight of people who never learned how to love you the way you needed. You're not ungrateful for protecting your peace. You're not dramatic for choosing yourself. You're just human, and that's enough. This is the last chapter of that story. Not because I've forgotten, but because I've lived beyond it. The girl who once sat waiting in cafes hoping her father would show up doesn't exist anymore. She grew up. She let go. And she learned that love, real love, starts within. And this time the ending wasn't written by them. It was written by me. Story 2. Threw my dad a birthday party only for him to get wasted and tell everyone that having me was his worst mistake. I thus requested that he be taken out of the restaurant by calling security. When I was 6 years old, my parents separated. They were young when they were married, but once the honeymoon period passed, they began to argue often. In addition to paying their college debts, they were both putting in extra hours to pay off mounting expenditures. My mom discovered out she was pregnant the year they were scheduled to divorce. For reasons I don't grasp. They made the decision to attempt their marriage one final time. My earliest childhood recollections are of my parents shouting at each other as loudly as they could. Therefore, this was a huge mistake. This was how every morning would begin. In response to my mother's criticism of my dad for not helping out around the home and not cleaning up after himself, My dad would complain about my mom's cooking skills and how useless she was. He simply wasn't in the mood for it, therefore, if she prepared waffles, toast, or pancakes, he would have a problem. He would frequently declare that he wished he had never married her and compare her to his mother. In response, she would claim that she regretted having a kid with him and that she ought to have married a wealthy guy. This happened almost daily. Playing with my meal, I would occasionally just try to drown out the background sounds. However, it did have a lasting effect on me since it helped me realize that they both kind of blamed me for their inability to leave one another. In order to avoid having to spend any time with my mom or me, my dad would deliberately return home late at night if my mother bemoaned being overworked. His job was more essential than hers, he would snort and tell her. He would be fine and kind to me for half an hour if I ever wanted to play with him. But after that, he would become agitated and chastise me for being too dependent. Even as an adult, I still fear seeming needy among other people since I remember his saying it to me so much when I was a youngster. As time passed, our family life gradually deteriorated even worse. My dad would come home from the pub intoxicated and stomp off to the couch to pass out, while my mom would spend her evenings drinking. They both began skipping work, and occasionally they would even fail to get up in time to get me ready for school. The weekends were considerably worse since I went hungry a lot of the time because neither of my parents could cook or even order takeout because they were too drunk or hungover. The cycle of chaos and neglect never ended. I now realize that my parents' actions may land them in jail, but at the time I had no other adult to keep me safe. Occasionally, after speaking with me, my professors would contact my parents to speak with me. However, no one was concerned enough to contact CPS because I had no physical abuse proof. As I became older, I took on the role of unofficial mediator in all of my parents' arguments. Although I was still a youngster, I believed that I had some sort of duty to maintain harmony at home. I was aware of the things my parents didn't like about one another. For instance, I started picking up my dad's socks and towel after himself every day since my mom detested the fact that he never did so, believing that there would be less fighting as a result. I was aware that my dad detested my mom for sitting on the couch and watching noisy TV. I would thus beg my mom to turn down the music before my dad returned home each evening. As a youngster, I found it challenging to try to diffuse my parents' arguments or divert their attention. Nevertheless, they would always end up fighting no matter what I did. As a youngster, I had to bear a lot of it, and I frequently felt powerless and overwhelmed. I longed for a calm house where I could feel secure and cared for, but instead I was always stressed and anxious. I've even seen my parents fight physically on a few times, after which my mother would spend hours locking herself in the toilet to protect herself. Their argument became even more heated one evening. My dad began to bleed from his nose when my mother hurled a glass bottle directly in his face. Some of the things have been filtered out since my mother shouted at me to dial 911. However, I do recall being questioned by the police regarding the altercation. When CPS was ultimately contacted, my parents were verbally warned that I would be taken away the next time this occurred. In front of the cops, they acted as though they cared, but I don't think they really did. After everyone had departed, they did speak with me and assured me that they would try to improve themselves. But such assurance was short-lived. My parents were obviously incompatible, even though they tried to keep their marriage intact. Their communication styles, values, and priorities were always at odds. I could see the toll it had on myself and both of them. Fortunately, they made the decision to permanently dissolve their marriage when I was 13. Knowing that the ongoing chaos would eventually cease was somewhat relieving, but it also signaled the start of a new chapter that would bring its own set of difficulties and adaptations. My time had to be divided between my parents' several residences. In order to provide for herself and me, my mother sought employment and received child support from my father. She had a very hard time finding one at first, but my uncle, who is her cousin, helped her land a desk job as a secretary. She worked there for a number of years under a patient and compassionate supervisor who paid her well. I'm still incredibly thankful that her boss chose to hire my mom, since she truly saved our life and helped pay for everything around the house. I got the opportunity to meet her boss and his family on several occasions during work parties. In contrast, my dad started drinking more and more as if there were no tomorrows. My dad would either be intoxicated or bring a random lady into the house to hook up with, which is why I feared being around him. I detested it since it was so unpleasant. But I was concerned that telling my mother would lead to another one of their big arguments, and I was just sick of it all, so I didn't have much of an option. My dad has had several long-term relationships throughout the years. Before cheating on her, he dated the first one for a year, the second for 6 months, and the third for 3 years in a row. Since they are both single mothers with 1 or 2 kids, I've observed a trend in his dating history. When my dad dates these ladies, he becomes quite close to their kids. He shares their photos on social media and even joins them in celebrating their birthdays. In the meanwhile, my mother had to remind him of significant occasions in my life, such as my prom or birthday, because he occasionally forgot everything. Additionally, he would constantly pressure me to interact with his girlfriend's kids, telling me that they would be my future siblings. I detested his habit as much as you can imagine. I know my dad was unmarried and could date anybody he wanted, but he would constantly act like a good father in front of other kids while ignoring his own child. I recall the father-daughter dance that was held at my school. I suspected my father would find a reason not to go. And of course he did. He insisted that one of his girlfriend's kitchens required some work despite my mother's attempts to reason with him. My mom's cousin, one of my uncles, brought me to the dance, and I had a great time, so even though I was a little upset, everything worked out. My dad would increasingly disregard me as I grew older, and he continued to date. When he told my mother that he would be out drinking or partying all night, he stopped allowing me stay at his house, and my mother understandably didn't object. When my dad unexpectedly contacted me one lovely day to ask whether I was available for dinner that evening, things became much worse. Thinking that perhaps he was finally missing me and wanted to spend some time with me alone, I enthusiastically consented. You can only imagine how shocked I was when he arrived outside our house in a fancy automobile and honked loudly to take me up. When I rushed outside, I noticed an elderly man seated at the rear and him sitting close to a blonde woman. My dad introduced me to Gina, his new lover, and her son Robin later over supper. Robin, who was 5 years my senior, didn't seem too excited to meet me. Gina did give me a grin, but she didn't talk much to me during the meal. My dad was always talking about how well he and Gina were getting along and how proud he was of Robin for playing such excellent football and seemingly leading his entire team to victory. My dad was even given a toast by Robin at one point, stating that he had never witnessed his mother happier with another guy. My dad and Gina were obviously in love since they were all over one other and blushing. I was thus not shocked when my father announced to me a few months later that he was marrying her. My mom and I were delighted to accept his invitation as guests until I discovered that Robin was my dad's groomsman. He and my dad were talking like best friends, laughing side by side. My mother must have seen my look because she offered me a hug. I was feeling a strange mix of rage and envy. I watched my dad celebrate with his new family at the ceremony, pretending that it was his first marriage. He never once asked me to take a family photo. He only ever approached me to inquire about my mother's and my happiness. I felt so unimportant, as if I had lost my place in his life. I grew quieter as the evening went on, as I tried to make sense of the flurry of emotions churning inside of me. I felt like my life was falling apart, and I couldn't comprehend how my dad could be so content and carefree. Robin slipped into the role of my dad's son and seemed to fit right in. When my mother and I needed to take a break, my father didn't even give me a farewell hug. My dad was dancing and smiling with his new family, and I believe it was the last time I saw them. I didn't really care to get in touch with him after that. I came to the realization that he didn't truly miss me unless I phoned or contacted him. He would keep sending child support for several months, but he never once bothered to check in. I made sure to select the university that would be the most remote from the city when it came time for me to attend college. I wanted to flee that awful spot and all the unpleasant memories, even though my mother didn't want me to travel so far. My mother did tell me that my dad had fully changed his ways, quit drinking, and had a much better job today. My father didn't call me until months after I had already enrolled in college. He expressed his amazement that I had grown up so much. I was not very shocked that he had never observed anything about me, so I snorted. In an attempt to strike up a conversation, he kept asking me random questions before launching into a spiel about how Robin had landed a fantastic job, which incidentally was in the same city as my institution. He said he felt it would be great to meet me too, and that he and Gina would be coming over to see Robin. He persisted in pressuring, so I finally gave up, even though I assured him it was okay. I hated to say it, but I missed my dad. I probably shouldn't have. I wanted both of my parents to love me and treat me as the child I deserved to be, regardless of his relationship with my mother. And I'm hoping my dad will come to see it in the future. I was delighted and suited up for the evening we were to meet in a cafe close to my campus. But after a few hours, I sat by myself in the cafe drinking my coffee and staring at the door. However, my father never arrived. I called him often, but he didn't respond. My mother also phoned him after I informed her, concerned that he could have had some sort of mishap. My dad contacted me back 3 hours later to let me know that he was unable to meet me tonight because he was too preoccupied with watching a football game with Robin and had lost count of time. Hearing him say this so nonchalantly, as though I hadn't just spent the evening anticipating our meeting, was like a kick to the gut. He was obviously still with Gina and Robin, since I could hear them talking joyfully after so many months in the background. When I informed him that I had spent hours sitting by myself at the cafe, he said that I ought to have gone after the first hour when he failed to appear and attempted to offer his customary clumsy excuses. I blocked him and ended the conversation because I was so angry. My mother may have phoned him, but she backed my choice, telling him that he had obviously failed as a parent to me. Even though I sobbed a lot that night, I felt sad and terrible about what had transpired the following morning. When I opened my mail app, I was shocked to discover a lengthy email from my dad apologizing to me and pleading with me to unblock him. I suppose my mother's rage and remarks must have reached my dad. He stated that he never imagined his acts would have such a profound impact on me and that he would improve. I realized I couldn't continue doing this to my mental health, so I didn't unblock him. My dad kept sending me emails for months after that, occasionally wishing me a happy birthday or a significant occasion, but I would never return the favor. In the meantime, I learned to be content with spending time with the one parent who truly loved me, since my mother would frequently visit me at my university whenever we both had a break. I woke up to many missed calls from my mom's side of the family and a hospital during my 3rd year in college. My mother had been in severe condition after an accident I found out when I contacted my family back. I packed my things to spend the night at my hometown after my heart fell. My roommate kindly volunteered to take me there, and we arrived considerably sooner than I had expected. When I passed out, I recalled seeing my mother in the hospital bed with tubes all over her. I recall the physicians attempting to communicate with me, but I was unable to comprehend their words. There wasn't much that could be done because my mother had obviously fallen into a coma. The doctors informed me that she didn't suffer much before she died 3 days later. Those days are similarly hazy, so I don't recall much of them. I do recall weeping and simply crashing into my dad's arms when I saw him. I was simply thankful that I had someone to weep on at that moment, and I didn't give a damn about how angry I was with him. My father took over, and to my surprise, made sure my mother had a beautiful burial. Gina and Robin made every effort to support me as best they could. I was able to eat every day since Mom's family would frequently bring prepared dinners. I couldn't move, eat, or sleep, so I would simply lie in bed. Looking back, I'm not sure how I managed to survive those times, but I did. When it came to reading my mother's will, she had stipulated that I would inherit everything she possessed, including her paid-for house and automobile. I didn't have to worry about taking out any loans because I had enough money in her savings account to finish college. I didn't have to worry because my dad also agreed to cover any more expenses that could arise. I agreed to rent the property to a pleasant couple since I didn't want to sell it at the time, and it ended up becoming a source of income for me. Since the automobile made it easier for me to go to and from my part-time work, I chose to keep it for myself. I eventually returned to my university since I was skipping a lot of courses. On a daily basis, my dad would message and phone me to check on me. I found it really difficult to continue living without my mother, and all of a sudden, I felt empty. My university teachers were generally quite tolerant, and my classmates assisted me in getting back on track with my tasks. Because Gina and Robin would visit me on the weekends with my dad, I did got to know them much better at this period. My dad would take me out to dinner and football games, and for the first time, I felt like he was treating me like his own family. I didn't really notice anything bad about Gina at first, but as time went on and I began to spend more time with her and my dad, I became aware of how she could occasionally be a little judgmental and theatrical. When my dad didn't do anything precisely the way she wanted him to, she would become upset and quarrel with him like a teenager. She would sulk in the driveway and not enter the house until my dad agreed to order pizza, for instance. If we were returning from a game and she wanted pizza and we all wanted burgers, she threatened to divorce my dad if he didn't agree, or voiced any complaints about the thousands of dollars she was spending on hair and nails, by the way. She would also casually use disparaging language while remarking on other females' fashion choices. As a young woman myself, I didn't want to criticize or denigrate other women based only on their clothing choices, thus it truly disturbed me. She would then turn around and tell me that she was the most popular girl in her high school and that modern females couldn't match her. I would have to bite my tongue to avoid saying something offensive in response, and I would just nod since it was so awkward. Gina became even more vicious once Robin acquired a girlfriend. Since Gina believes that women are out to baby trap, she would persistently ask the poor girl unpleasant and awkward questions, such as how many guys she has slept with, and if she is using a condom, if I were ever invited to a family meal where Robin was also bringing his girlfriend. Robin, her son, would simply feel uneasy. He doesn't care. During this time, if he ever questioned his mother about this embarrassing conduct, she would cry and tell my dad that she just meant well and that she was only thinking for her little boy. This is essentially how I knew that if my dad came to see me, I needed to stay away from Gina as much as possible to keep him from knowing. At first, he would acquiesce when I asked if we could spend some time alone, but Gina would keep calling and interfering with our time. I later learned that she was using Find My Phone to trace his phone and would call to see if he was indeed with me or another lady. After a year, I was in complete turmoil on the anniversary of my mother's passing. In order to visit her cemetery and then go out to lunch, my dad and I had made the decision to spend the entire day together. I made it very evident to him that I didn't want to spend time with anybody else because it was a really vulnerable day. But in spite of my request, he arrived with Gina, who appeared to be enjoying a pleasant road trip. She was always playing music or eating chips. Gina questioned me why I was still sobbing for my mother after it had been a year since her death at one point when I was crying uncontrollably because I was missing her while looking at her pictures on my phone. As though it were absurd of me to still miss my own mother, she underlined the word year. I was furious about this, but I was reluctant to speak up. I was hoping my dad would defend me. Unfortunately, he made no response. Then, when we got to my mom's grave with the flowers I had purchased, Gina wouldn't go outside and told my dad and I that we had to return right away because she couldn't stand the heat. I recall asking myself, what was the point of her coming at all, if complaining was all she was going to do? She refused to allow us to respectfully pay our respects to my mother and would not even pay any. She started calling my dad's phone while we were just 5 minutes late, indicating that we needed to finish up as soon as possible. I gave up and walked quietly back to the car. As lunchtime arrived, despite the fact that neither my dad nor our fans liked Chinese food, Gina chose it because it was her favorite. My dad, however, caved in as usual. All in all, the day was going exactly the other way from how I had expected it to. Gina must have observed that I was eating very little at the Chinese buffet. I wanted to be left alone with my thoughts, so I shook my head when she inquired if something was wrong. but then Gina started berating me, stating that I was ruining the mood for the entire day. She further said that she would never want her son Robin to be as melancholy and sullen among other people if she were to die. I lost all control of my fury at this point, and lost my temper going on a tirade about how she had no right to dictate to me how I should deal with my sorrow when I was the one who had lost her mother. I continued after that. I advised her to remain at home if she really thought I was destroying the atmosphere, because all I wanted to do was talk to my dad and grieve over my mother. I felt ashamed about everything, and my dad and Gina were surprised by my outburst. To get my thoughts straight, I hurried out of the restaurant. My dad came out later looking serious and said that although he could see my point of view, I should show more consideration for his wife, who had given up her entire day to be with me. Since I had explicitly requested to spend the day with Justin, I wondered why he had even brought her along. In response, my dad said that Gina felt I was becoming too reliant and that I shouldn't spend so much time by myself with him as an adult daughter. Hearing those remarks nearly brought tears to my eyes, since they brought back memories of my early years when my father would become irate if I demanded more of his attention and would chastise me for being needy. My mom would never have made me feel terrible about weeping, so I'm not sure whether I was being needy or clinging that day. I only knew that I missed her even more. I attempted to apologize, but Gina wouldn't talk to me throughout the somber car journey home. A few days after the event, Dad informed me that Gina was still upset with me for my actions. Since I was largely to blame for this, he requested if I could come over to his house and formally apologize to her over dinner. He said that he and Gina had been fighting nonstop while I made her seem bad in public. This notion made me furious, and I vehemently objected. Gina's responses were juvenile, I said. My apology has already been sent, I insisted. I informed him on the way home that I would no longer participate in her antics if she continued. My dad tried to change my mind, but I was certain about my choice. My friendship with Gina has never been better since that day. Robin also stopped talking to me after that, but I'm not sure what she said to him. That was the only one who occasionally paid me a visit, such as when I graduated from college or when I started my first job. He kept pleading with me to apologize to Gina, telling me that we could all return to being a typical family. However, I've never paid attention. Gina and I have avoided meeting unless it is absolutely essential throughout the years, and when we are in the same room, we both try our best to ignore one another. My mother's passing still causes me sorrow, but now that I'm an adult, I know how to manage my feelings more effectively. After I graduated, I did sell my mother's house and purchase a modest condo in the city where I presently work. As much as I can, I have stayed in contact with my mother's family. Harry and I are quite happy together, and I am also dating him. He and my dad have bonded over football and golf, and my dad has met him many times. Up until this recent occurrence, everything in my life had been going well. Since my dad's impending 50th birthday was such a significant occasion, I decided to throw him a birthday celebration weeks in advance. When I asked him if he was cool with it, he was more than glad to inform me that he wanted to invite Gina and Robin, and that he hoped this birthday celebration would help mend our relationship. I didn't want to dispute with him again, but I had my doubts. I told him that I was amenable to it because so many years had gone by. If Gina also approved of it. All my dad and his family had to do was turn up in their finest clothes because I planned and paid for the entire event at a fancy restaurant. Harry and I arrived at the location that evening first, followed an hour later by my dad, Gina, and Robin. I called my dad many times, but he never answered, so I knew something was wrong. I could tell my dad had been drinking as soon as he entered since he needed Robin's assistance to walk normally. My father held me and smiled broadly. Gina walked right up to embrace my boyfriend, who gave her an uncomfortable look without even acknowledging me. Robin nodded to me and assisted my father in taking a seat at the table. When I asked them what had occurred, Robin said that my dad wanted to start his birthday early, so he had chosen to pre-game before coming. I knew how humiliating my dad could be, having grown up witnessing him become wasted every night, so I shook my head. Seeing my look, Gina chuckled and loudly remarked that my dad was just having fun and that I should simply learn to relax. When she said that, my eyebrows narrowed, since this was a very pricey restaurant. And if my dad started acting like he normally does when he's drunk, we may all be permanently barred from it. My dad was so drunk that he couldn't even hold his fork straight when the waiter brought our main entrees. Gina and Robin continued to gesture at my dad and giggle as Harry and I attempted to concentrate on our dinner. My dad continued to drink when wine was provided, which made him even more inebriated. My dad abruptly stood up from the chair and loudly announced that he wanted to offer a toast despite my repeated requests for him to stop. As he began to talk about how happy he was to be reaching 50 with his amazing family and how fortunate he was to have Gina and Robin in his life, I reluctantly picked up my glass. He went on to remark that divorcing his former wife was the finest choice he had ever made, which made my heart sink. He was driven insane by that lady, my mother. Gina laughed. I glanced at him angrily when I heard this. He went on to add that his life was meaningless until he met Gina and married her, and that this is what saved it. While all of this was going on, Gina and Robin continued to encourage him and smile as though it was okay to say this in front of me, as though this wasn't sufficient. My father then turned to face me. His words slurred together as he went on to declare that marrying my mother was his worst life decision since it left him trapped with her for all those years after she became pregnant with me. Because he wanted his future chapter in life to be free of the mistakes of the past, he then loudly laughed and joked that I should leave him tonight to spend his birthday with his true family. As if it were the greatest joke, Robin and Gina burst out laughing at this. I inhaled deeply and realized that this was too much for me to bear. With shaking hands and a sorrowful heart, I requested that they call for security officers when I called for the waiter. My dad's loud statements reverberated throughout the room, and the waiter didn't even pause before 2 security officers showed up at our table a few minutes later. The other guests were agitated by their presence. "We'll have to ask you to leave, sir. We're sorry." With a strong gesture toward the exit, one of the guards stated. When my dad understood what was going on, his cheeks flushed with shame. I refused to back down when he sputtered in outrage and begged me to stop them. Gina began yelling that my dad was simply enjoying his birthday and that I was making him seem foolish in front of everyone. Neither the security guys nor I gave a damn. My dad was led out grudgingly, accompanied by Gina and Robin, who were yelling at me in a rage. I later apologized to the staff and all of the diners after becoming quite emotional. I left them a generous gratuity after supper. In addition, ever since that meal, Gina and Robin have been texting me nonstop, calling me derogatory names, alleging that I destroyed the atmosphere and advising me to leave if I didn't want to be humiliated by my dad's actions. My dad has made many attempts to reach me, but I have consistently declined his calls. My dad shouted all those awful things to my face, so I'm on Reddit to ask if he should be kicked out. First update. How did this post go viral in just a few hours? Well, I understand, folks. I was correct to evict my father. I am grateful that all of you agree with my choice, but I did not anticipate hundreds of commenters to do so. No matter how pathetic my dad is, I still don't want any of you to write more nasty things about him. He is still my father, and I came to Reddit to find out whether what I did was good or not. I think I have my answer for the time being. 2 weeks have passed since my previous post, and in case you were wondering, my dad has not been in touch with me since. I have also stopped receiving communications from Gina and Robin. I only learned that my post had gone viral today, and Robin may have recognized my tale because he forwarded my dad the link to it. My dad may have seen the comments and realized how many people believed that he and Gina were a bunch of jerks. I'm not ready to forgive him just yet, but I'm not sure how our relationship will develop in the future. The third update. Hello, everyone. My previous update was over 7 months ago. It's unbelievable how much better my life has been since then. I first went to therapy in order to release the years and years of trauma I had experienced as a youngster. Since I made the decision to completely break off my dad and his family without giving any reason, I can now see why individuals feel better after attending therapy. My life is going great, and I am fortunate to have a great lover like Harry who looks out for me and understands me. Since I've already moved on with my life, I hope this will be my final update here.